Good morning, everyone. I saw this yesterday and I thought, man, I knew last year that kitchen table issues, prices for rent, prices for groceries were going to be a big election issue. And I've been door knocking, and this is a big election issue. And I saw this, and when you are spending $50 a week more, $100 a week more at the grocery store, you cannot save that money. And if you cannot save that money, how do you get ahead? How do you get out of debt? If you are in debt, if you have a car payment to make and you want to make an extra payment or something to that effect, how do you do that when you're spending more and more money at the grocery store? And that's what I mean by kitchen table issues. When you sit down at the kitchen table at the end of the month and say, we have no money left, good thing we could eat this month, until you get the hydro bill, right? So when the government of Canada is implementing policies that are increasing food prices, that's important. And it's important to note how fast they're rising. It was noticeable in 2016. I started pointing it out. I said, man, that's expensive. The other week, I saw a $10 box of cereal, $9.99 for Fruit Loops. I'm in Guelph. This is not a small town. $10 for a box of Fruit Loops. I was blown away. $9 for a stalk of celery? Celery? At Zayre's? That's insanity. $9? You don't need crunch that much. Get some water chestnuts, for crying out loud. Ctvnews is reporting, quote, Canadian vegetable prices rising at fastest pace in 3 years. 3 years, it's crazy. Canadians are paying a premium to eat healthy, and loading up the cart with fresh vegetables has become far more expensive over the past year. According to new data released by Statistics Canada on June 19th, prices for fresh vegetables are up almost 17% over last year in May. That's the 8th straight month of double-digit gains and the fastest yearly growth since the start of 2016. The price gains are widespread across the produce aisle, with even potatoes costing 16% more and tomatoes up 14%. Dalhousie University professor Sylvian Charlebois, sorry if I got that wrong, says celery is one of the most expensive, with prices for a stalk as much as $9. Chomp chomp. Is tuna salad worth that? Back to the article. Consumers are starting to notice, especially with celery and other types of produce, he said. Typically, when consumers are spooked with produce prices, they tend to go with some visits in the freezer aisle. Food prices rose overall by 3.5% in the same year. Statistics Canada reports the rise in prices likely reflects the challenging weather conditions and supply shortages in some growing areas. It's due to unfortunate weather patterns. It was expected. That's what we were expecting when we released Canada's food price report back in December. We were expecting food prices to be quite volatile this year, and that's exactly what's happening, unfortunately. But Charlebois says he believes prices will stabilize this summer. Interesting, right? And here's HuffPo blaming Trump. And I thought this article title was really hilarious. Like, Canadian food prices are accelerating. Really? They're going 140 on the 401? They're accelerating. They're going so fast. Blame weather and Donald Trump. Blame Donald Trump, says HuffPo. That Donald Trump, he made Justin Trudeau institute the carbon tax. It's his fault. Blame Donald Trump. I wanted to point this out. This is kind of just a story that I noted, but I wanted to note it. The Canadian Bureau for International Education notes 572,415 international students in Canada at all levels of study in 2018. I don't think that counts towards our 300 and I think it's 340 now, maybe 310. 310, I'll say, level of immigrants coming in officially through the government of Canada. That's the level the Liberals set. I think this is another number, and it feeds into that number. Like, this number of students will apply for permanent residency and have a better shot at it. But I wanted to show you the 310 number is not the total number of foreign people coming into Canada to work or study every year. There's the Temporary Foreign Workers Program, which is, again, over and above the 310 and this number here, and the international students. And I just wanted you to be aware of it because it is not insignificant, especially in our population. Our population is small, so this is a big number in a small population. And, well, I mean, I've been reading some stories, firsthand accounts of people at universities, post-secondary institutions right now, and a lot of them are saying that many of the international students are very clear about why they're there, and it's not to get a great education. And, well, that's not good for Canada. That's not good for Canada, because if they're just there for the citizenship aspect of things, and that's what they're saying from the stories that I've been reading, so I'm just reporting what I've been reading, then that's not positive, right? Like, that doesn't work the way it's intended to work, is what I'm saying. Okay, back to environmental stuff, because this is all about the environment this morning, I suppose, from here on in. And Justin Trudeau is using $18 million of our taxpayer dollars to fund a private airport at a golf course. Really? Yeah, pretty cool. Here's Sheila Walker tweeting, quote, "But there's a climate emergency. What about all the CO2 from those private jets? Hypocrite. October can't come fast enough." And it says Trudeau must go. And I'm not going to go through this one. It's the link is in the description if you want to check it out. But it says Trudeau takes $18 million in taxpayer money to fund a private airport at a golf resort. And here's another one. Why would you build an airport during a climate emergency? And this is more of your taxpayer dollars spent for liberal gains. Why would you build an airport during a climate emergency? Indeed. That seems like a strange choice. Liberals, climate emergency, we're going to tax your CO2. But, I've got a lot of friends who have their own jets, and they'd really like to land closer to the golf course than they currently can. So, $18 million. What's $18 million? And that's not over 5 years either. In my town, we got $1.48 million over 5 years. And, well, Justin's got enough to spend $18 million for his buddies to land at the golf course. Andrew Scheer is tweeting, and this is follow-up to his climate plan, and I'm going to show you. So Justin Trudeau says carbon tax with, an airport whenever he decides. And Andrew Scheer says we are going to develop our technology and export our technology and make Canada wealthy off that green technology, etc. And, well, here's his tweeting. He says, yes, we need to focus on what we can do here at home to lower our own emissions, but we also need to look at what we can do to help other high-emitting countries lower their emissions. That's the Conservative plan. And I am 100% against sending money to other countries to develop their resources, whether that's to fight climate change or not. 100% against that plan. Selling things to other countries? Sure, if we want to upgrade China's some of their gas plants or their coal plants to take LNC, fine. But I don't want to pay China to do that. I don't want to spend money, Canadian taxpayer money, to say, if you change all of these plants, we'll give you $100 million. Please. No, I don't want to do that. I don't think that's the right way to do things, period. And so I think that this is kind of strange. I don't know if Andrew Scheer is proposing to include incentives or any payments to China or any other third world or other country, period, to adopt our technology. I don't know if that's part of his plan. Full disclosure, I'm not trying to say that's part of his plan, but part of his plan is to offer that, right? So, and I'm going to show you what I'm talking about. I'll show you on the real plan for climate change, right? And here it is. And here's Andrew Scheer himself talking about exactly what I'm talking about. Okay. Here.
Hello, Teresa Wright from the Canadian Press. Are you planning to meet Canada's targets by cutting emissions elsewhere or taking credit for helping other jurisdictions to cut their emissions?
So as I've said today, what's important is that we don't just stay focused on what we can do here at home. It's important. It's very, very important that Canada shows the world and takes responsibility for our emissions. This plan does just that. It has a comprehensive approach to lower domestic greenhouse gas emissions through a variety of ways. But we also must realize that if we stop there, we don't do the world any favors, that we have a role to play. We can punch above our weight. We can leverage the technology and the advancements that we've already accomplished here in this country by accelerating even more of it and sharing it around the world. There are countries around the world that are knocking at our door to be able to take advantage of things like Canadian carbon capture and sequestration, like LNG. And if we had a government that was proud of that and included that in the mix, we could do much more to fight global emissions. So whether or not we get credit for it is less important than if we get those real results and actually lower those emissions.
So I find it interesting. China is mentioned a lot in this, and China is a big emission producer. Here it's noted, and this is in the Arealplan PDF, and a link will be in the description. You have to download it from Dropbox, but this is page, I don't know what page it is, 17. And it says Canada would not make a global impact by focusing only on reducing emissions within our own borders. Canada is a relatively low emitter. If you shut down Canada's whole economy for 1 year, it would take China only 21 days to replace our emissions. Okay, so he's saying that basically China is building a Canada in emissions every 21 days, which is, I think that's a little fast. I think it's actually 4 months, but I could be wrong on that. But China is mentioned a lot here, and that's concerning because, well, China has been taking technology, right? And if we're trying to export our technology, then using China as like the petri dish for that first export seems like a bad idea, because we're going to initially get competition with our own technology because that's what China does. And I mean, that's well known. Donald Trump talks about this. There's been discussion of them infringing on patents, even on Google. Basically, Google says we better work with them, or they're just going to clone Google and do it themselves. Like, this is not a controversial thing. This is just what they do. And so it seems weird to note China so many times in your plan. Here's the second example. For example, Canada's liquefied natural gas, LNG, has the potential to provide a cleaner alternative for power generation in countries like China as they transition away from coal. By promoting LNG, we can support a key driver of the Canadian economy and reduce global emissions at the same time. The world would be better off with Canadian LNG and less Chinese coal. Right, but how are you going to do that, Mr. Scheer? China is refusing to have our canola, our pork, and basically anything to do with Canada, period, until Meng Wanzhou is cleared or sent to the United States for extradition. And Trump is currently holding all the cards, and Justin Trudeau is hiding in a closet. I think that's pretty much what he's doing. So how do you propose to bridge that gap, right? How are we going to be exporting our liquefied natural gas and stop China from building a Canada in emissions, according to your document, every 21 days? That seems like a tall ask. That seems like a big, a big leap from where we are to where you want to be. How are you going to do that? Here's another note of China, and it just notes their emissions in the document. And there's one last one. 3,000 coal plants. If China fitted just 100 plants with carbon capture and storage, they could eliminate more than 300 megatons of CO2 per year, nearly half of what Canada's entire economy produces. So that's his push for, look, we can do way more for the world, right? But again, I want to say, and it doesn't say in here if we would incentivize any other government to use our technology, or if it would just be a straight business deal. Like, hey, we have this tech. Do you want to buy it? It's $800,000 or $900,000 or whatever. And here's a non-disclosure agreement saying that you won't sell this technology. You want to try it? That seems like an okay idea. That seems like a really good idea, actually. But it also seems to me like every time we talk about doing stuff like this, we say, oh, but we have to give it away. Or we have to sell it to a company. So we'll sell it to this company and they'll broker the deal with China and they'll make all the money. But we paid for it, right, taxpayer? It just seems really weird. Like that's always what goes with this kind of garbage. And that's not what I want to see. I want to see, if we're going to do it, I want to see Canada making revenue from it. That's the green technology boom that we can do, potentially, maybe, if it works. But as I said, there's a whole lot of barriers to dealing with China at this point in time. And here's the other aspect of this. This is a 2015 article going back talking about the government, or the current government's environment plan, and they're giving billions of dollars away. Here's, under the previous climate deal signed in 2009 in Copenhagen, nations had agreed to commit $100 billion annually in fast-track financing by 2020. The former conservative government gave $1.2 billion to the fund. That's 2009. What has that money done? Where has that money been spent? Have we seen any kind of concrete anything for that cash? For the $300 million in 2016-17, $400 million in 2017-18, $500 million in 2018-19, and now we're in 2019-20, and we're supposed to be giving $650 million this year. What have we seen for the $1 billion we've spent so far? Here's back to the article. The Liberals have now doubled that amount for the next 5 years. So I've just read out what we're spending, and next year we're supposed to spend $800 million. What's Scheer's plan for this? Is he going to repeal that? Are we going to keep that nearly $1 billion in Canada? Or we maybe just give it to the media? They need that money. We've got to have a democracy after all. Pay the media off with that. I don't know. It seems pretty incredible. What did we get for any of it? A safer world? Oh, right. Just don't go to Toronto. Because, you might get shot with an illegal gun. Because they're all illegal now. Back to the article. The funding will go towards reducing emissions by financing clean power generation, for example. Right. And back to my clauses about this, right? If we're doing it in a way that is making money for people being Canadian taxpayers, and maybe reducing our tax load, maybe reducing our deficit, maybe reducing our debt, maybe reducing the GST, maybe reducing costs associated with development, maybe helping the municipalities out with the millions of dollars that they've spent on supporting illegals who have been allowed in from the federal government. All of those things are needed, and none of them are being done. Interesting. right? Here's Lori Goldstein saying Canadian Conservative leader's climate plan would increase emissions, expert, and it's a Vice.com article, so I'm not going to look at it because Vice.com is being shut down systemically, but I just thought it was funny. Like, everybody's piling on wherever they can. Like, the Conservative plan's terrible, ha 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 ha, right? Yeah, well, that's to be expected. Everything that the Conservatives do in Canada is terrible, according to the mainstream and corporate media. So here's Ctvnews reporting the same thing. Scheer acknowledges feds would put price on carbon under his plan to cap big emitters. So Justin Trudeau's putting a price on pollution and Scheer's putting a price on carbon, but it's a mechanism to make the companies spend money. The problem with this, and I'm going to read the article in just a second, the problem with this is when you start a business, you have very little revenue generally to churn. If you're starting a business, you don't have somebody paying you a salary most of the time. Sometimes you do, if you are lucky and you've got a boss who doesn't mind you working nights and weekends on something else or whatever. But most of the time, you don't have a steady salary. So if you're working on a business, the business is trying to sustain you. So the first $50,000 in profit is generally used to keep people afloat and slammed back into the business to hopefully keep it going, right? And when you start to say, great, now we're gonna do this mechanism that helps you reduce your CO2 and increase your green or whatever, green compliancy or whatever, that it reduces the amount and the ability, mobility, liquidity of your money to move it around to make sure that you can survive that really, really difficult period in a business. And if you can't survive it, then the business fails. And there's no amount of government taxes going to be extracted from it because it failed. And so it seems really strange to me to continue to double down on the mechanisms to force businesses to make changes when all that does is stifle the innovation of businesses, right? It's already very difficult. Most people I know don't understand even how business works and makes money. Like, they understand that, people buy a widget and the business makes money and then I get a paycheck. And they don't understand how and why scale is a thing, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And not everybody should understand business, but most people should understand that business works, that capitalism works fundamentally as a principle. It creates abundance and it creates choice. And it's interesting that most people really don't care. And they look at things like jobs as stalwart, right? As something that's never going to move. It's always going to be there. It's very, there will be a job. Like, look at Walmart, right? Or look at the government. But these things there are examples, countless examples all through history. Look at Venezuela, right? Like, these things happen and they happen on purpose. It's interesting to watch. So it's interesting to see a conservative government okay with using these incentives, these business mechanisms to force businesses to do certain things. The nudge idea, and Amazing Polly talks a lot about it. I was really into, I've loved politics for a long time, but I used to listen to NPR podcasts, and there was a guy on there who's Obama's, one of his advisors, talking about nudging. I'm going to have to look it up. It was really interesting, especially in the context, almost 10 years later, because that nudge is without permission. They want you to do something. So they set up the circumstances for you to do that thing, and you do it without thinking about it, and all of a sudden it becomes necessary or becomes expected, part of what happens. It's I'm getting off topic. Okay, the last part here. Back to the article. In an interview on CTV's Question Period, Scheer said that if elected, his government would set the emissions target and would set the amount these companies and factories would have to spend on clean tech, but he refused to call it a tax or even a price. We will set ... that cap. And anything could fit in that ... I don't like this because, Mr. Scheer could be massively misrepresented here, and I don't know. So anything could fit in there. Okay. That cap, we will allocate those funds, but it's not a tax, Scheer said. The key difference between a tax and this plan is that the government doesn't collect this revenue. This is a process, a mechanism whereby these emitters can invest in reducing their emissions. Okay. So what that says to me is there's like a tax credit that if you are a business and you're like, I'm going to try and upgrade my freezers, right? Loblaws. I'm going to apply to the government and say, this is why I need to upgrade my freezers and this is what I'm doing. And this is the mechanism, right? So that's different than a tax. And I agree with Mr. Scheer. I just wanted to make that clear Back to the article. Scheer's billed his plan as Canada's best chance to meet the Paris targets without a carbon tax, but his proposals lack any estimates on how successful this slate of policies would be at reducing greenhouse gas emissions. Right, I talked about this a lot at length as well. There's no success metrics. There's no failure metrics. There's no any kind of metrics. It's just, we're going to reduce emissions maybe back to 2005, 30% of 2005. Right, whatever that is. Asked what the price would be per ton for those large emitters, Scheer said that that's a detail yet to be determined. Quote, we will be setting all those rates. We will be setting that schedule, and it will be designed to ensure that the large industrial emitters play their role, he said. Scheer defended the lack of clear targets in his plan, saying that in comparison to what the Liberals offered before they were elected, his pitch has more to offer. Right, the 60-page plan, a real plan to protect our environment, includes 55 policy proposals aimed at supporting green technology, innovation, and protecting the environment. A carbon tax is not one of them, nor is a ban on single-use plastics. So, and I've the link to this is the real plan PDF here. And the last piece of this puzzle is the other leader who's got something other than a carbon tax to offer is Maxime Bernier. And this is Canada's National Observer. This was from the event on Friday where Mr. Bernier introduced his candidates. And it says, Maxime Bernier recruits Renata Ford as he touts a plan that denies the climate crisis. Climate denial, how dare you? Bernier told the crowd of around 100 supporters, of which 40 were candidates, that federal conservatives and liberals were doing the same thing on climate change. They're not telling the truth to Canadians. He said neither party will be able to meet Canada's Paris Agreement target to reduce emissions to 30% below 2005 levels by 2030, and their plans are not good solutions. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau is promising to tax and rebate, while Conservative leader Andrew Scheer wants to tax and subsidize, he said. The solution is to be honest with Canadians. There's no climate change urgency in this country. We don't believe in the climate change history. We know that the climate is always changing, he said. Bernier questioned the mounds of scientific research. I like this use of the mounds of scientific research. Please, could you link to one? I understand IPCC, blah, 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 all that stuff. But anyway, that's another... I've done many videos on it. Okay, back to the article. Research linking the global climate emergency to human activity. This includes 2 stunning United Nations reports released in the past year, revealing human activity has put 1 million species at risk of extinction and brought the world within a little over a decade of apocalyptic natural destruction. Ah, yes. Right. Bernier said that he believes other factors have been taken into consideration, like the sun, the river, the ocean. He was informed of these factors a couple of weeks ago by Patrick Moore, formerly of Greenpeace, who has called climate change fake science. I want to point out here, this is not worded correctly or misreported or whatever, but I was there and he said, Mr. Bernier said on 2 weeks ago or something to that effect, he had a long discussion with Patrick Moore, who is a climate scientist, and he fleshed that out a bit more. There's a link in the description to the whole 25-minute speech if you want to watch it. But I just find it interesting how things are massaged in the media. Even like Andrew Scheer's stuff is massaged. It's meant to sound like a tax when it's not. Now, that said, there is part of his plan here that would require $900 million of Canadian taxpayer money for retrofitting. So where that's going to come from, but it's interesting, like it'll cost taxpayer dollars, but it's not necessarily a carbon tax in the same traditional sense, despite this article trying to make it sound that way, which I find interesting. So anyway, back to the article. I'm not a scientist. We are not scientists, but we are doing politics based on fact. And we know there are other scientists with other points of view, Bernier said Friday, adding his party will have a concrete policy on environment that will make sure Canadians can swim in the lakes, fish in the rivers, and have clean land. When pushed by National Observer to clarify his stance, Bernier reiterated that human activity was not the main cause of the global climate crisis. That's the difference between you and me, he said, before noting his party would also bring back the $2.3 billion that the Liberal government is giving to African countries to fight climate change. Do you think those dictatorships in Africa will use the money to fight climate change? He asked. And yeah, that was my question as well. What will Mr. Scheer do with this? Because we know what Mr. Trudeau will do with it. It's carried on. We know what the Greens and the NDP would do with it. I think that it would carry on. And Mr. Scheer hasn't mentioned it, and Mr. Bernier has. So I think that all of that is interesting. I think that the messaging on climate change is concerning across the board when people are talking about settled science and all of these climate change things. and there's so many, like you could talk about so many, it's been weaponized in a way that you can't talk about it, right? You can't have a conversation where you misspeak in a way that somebody can jump all over, right? Like the author goes on to say Mr. Bernier misspoke in the amount that was pledged. And I mean, 2.3, 2.65, he was referring to the 2015 amount. But it's funny how fraught this whole thing has become. It has become, I mean, dire, right? Like this is Y2K. This is the 2012 Mayan calendar end. This is apocalyptic in some people's minds. And it's so interesting that if you don't believe them, if you don't say, yes, it's happening, and yes, it's happening the way you say it is, then the conversation's over. They won't listen to you. There's nothing you could possibly say, despite the fact that, I mean, Higgs boson, the mass of the Higgs boson particle is, or the existence of the Higgs boson particle, which is proved by a whole bunch of supporting scientific documents, is not something that is 100% agreed upon in science, or even 97% agreed upon in science at this point in time. But climate change is. That seems strange, right? And I mean, the more you look at the how science works, the less it seems likely that a consensus, especially one screamed in the newspaper, could possibly understand and be correct about the world we live in, because there's so much we don't know. There's so much we don't know. I don't see how we could possibly say this is definitely what it is, 100%, and this is how we fix it, by eating worms. I think that we should solve the plastic problem. I think we should focus on that. I think that we should stop exporting plastics to third world countries. I think we should fix the idea that the things that we create in this country, like single-use plastics, should be solved by some other country. I think we should fix that. That seems pretty concrete. And that seems like something that in the short term would do a lot of good. Maybe we could then go farm the Pacific for its plastics and power things in Canada. And then we could be hailed as the plastic saviors of the Pacific Ocean. Or maybe not. Who knows? Maybe let's just tax everybody, and then in a really complicated web, redistribute that tax and not get anything done at all. Maybe we should do that while we watch our food prices increase because everybody's getting taxed more. You want some celery? Thanks for watching, everybody. Holy crap, this is a long video. Sorry. Thanks for watching. Have a wonderful day.